starting at the beginning, every reservist who goes overseas has to volunteer to do that. What was your motivation? Why did you volunteer in 2011?
Basically, I really don't see the point in joining the Army Reserve if you're not going to volunteer for events as they come up. I mean, my view is, you train to do all of these things, but you're doing it when you go on tour. So really it's a validation of all the training I did.
Was it just a clear-cut, I'm going?
I wanted to deploy before I joined. So I knew, once I joined, gone through my training, I was going to be submitting to put my name in for any operations.
So what did your family and friends think at the time when you told them I'm going to Afghanistan?
Well, my wife, it was already pre-discussed. So when I joined the Loyal Edmonton Regiment, I had already said that I want to join and I want to go on tour, so be wary of this. It was more my parents. They're generally quite anti-war, and they weren't so happy with the idea, and I think it kind of puts a little bit of a panic in them. They still live in Australia. So ultimately it was just smoothing them over more than anything. My wife had kind of come to terms with it by that stage. And as far as my children go, my youngest was just too young. He didn't understand. And the eldest, even then, he was about 9, so he understood, but again, he didn't really understand at a 9-year-old. So he just knew Dad was going to Afghanistan. Whatever he had seen in the news, he knew it wasn't a very safe place. But that was pretty good. They were very supportive, though. My immediate family.
It's a bit of a different situation, isn't it, when you've got a partner and you've got children, as opposed to if you were 21 years old or brand new lieutenant. How much did that go through your mind as you made your plan and your commitment to do this?
I think the big thing, I was obviously once 21 years old, and I think one of the big differences there is I felt that when I was young, your whole life's ahead of you, and there's a lot of things you want to do, and I guess you might see it as an adventure or whatever, but I think as far as dangers, I feel that I'd kind of lived a decent life by that stage. So I was in my 30s by the time I deployed, and I felt that I'd done a lot of the things I wanted to do already in my life, and I guess it wasn't. I feel it was probably better that I deployed later. Is what I'm getting at. I was more mature, and when you're young, I felt a lot that if let's say you did get hurt or something went wrong, you're missing out on a big part of your life. But in this case, I didn't. I felt comfortable and I was mature.
2011 is the year that Canada ceased combat operations in Afghanistan. Were you concerned that it was now or never, that you might miss the boat for this mission?
Definitely. I was fortunate enough to be, although it was a staff position in a div headquarters, it was the very last Op Athena deployment. So literally while I was over there, the trainers started coming in as part of the next training mission. And absolutely correct is that I didn't want to be so much on the training mission. I would have taken it, of course, but I really wanted to be, ultimately I wanted to do what I was trained to do, which was an infantry guy. Now I knew I couldn't, especially as a reservist, I was expecting a staff officer type position, but at least it was part of, I guess it was part of an initial, the original operation that was the SANT.
So what was your expectation in terms of what the situation would be like when you hit the ground?
I knew again that I was going to be a staff officer, so I think that's the most important part. So I had it in my head that I might get disappointed, and I know it sounds bad, but everyone, especially again, I say it as an infantry guy, is you feel that you're just going to be stuck behind a desk somewhere in a little camp where you're never going to see Afghanistan, and especially the dangers of Afghanistan, you're never even going to see it because you're behind a desk somewhere. and that was what I thought would happen. But again, you have to put your name in, and unless you put your name in, you'll never know. So I just accepted that.
So what did you put your name in to do? What was the actual position?
I originally had said just any position they could find, and what had come up was I was told it was a staff position working with the Chief of Staff at the NATO training headquarters in Kabul. And the actual listing on the CFTPO was, it was called a Staff Officer Protocol. So I had absolutely no idea what that meant. So I had to research what that was. And as it turned out, that's not what I did. I ended up becoming the aide-de-camp to the Deputy Commanding General for police training.
What, going in at this sort of late stage of Opafina, what did you do for workup training and where?
As it turned out, being again Div headquarters, I wasn't required to do the regular workup training like with the battle group because I wasn't part of the battle group. So my workup training consisted of 3 weeks at Kingston at the Peace Support Training Centre, going through all of your IBTS, and then effectively I was considered trained or ready to go. It didn't quite happen that way. There was a miscommunication, I think, at some point when the battle group was called up. So what actually happened was I was called in. You're going on this tour? Yep. Called in, and I was actually called in the November, like 6 months earlier. So then the Army was stuck finding stuff for me to do. So I ended up training at Wainwright, and it was really good training because it was all infantry type training. So I got to do a lot more, events working up, and even though the official workup was only meant to be the 3 weeks.
Did you go to Wainwright with the Van Doos?
No, I did not. I was sent there as part of the battle school, but during that there was also, I took any, say for example, any brigade X's or just any workup or any training I could do, but really you just had a guy they were paying to do anything that they wanted to put him on. So I was happy to do that.
So what were your first impressions when you hit the ground in Afghanistan?
The first thing I thought is everyone always said, "Oh yeah, you first get off the plane and the first thing you get is the heat." So it was like the exact opposite. I knew it was going to be hot. So really, it was more about what is everyone going to be like, and I kind of got the feeling that everyone was pretty relaxed. I landed in CAF, so it was a big base, and it just it seemed more like a city rather just arriving in a hot desert city is what my first impressions were. And arriving in Kabul, because obviously I had to move up, it was a little cooler, and it had the mountains, so I had to fly over the mountains, and that's when I first realized, you know what, this isn't all desert, it's actually got some beauty to it. So those were my first impressions.
When did you, where were you staying and what were those conditions like?
The conditions actually were very good. When I arrived in CAF, I was put in a trailer, so the conditions were nice. It was just regular old trailer. When I arrived in Kabul, the way it works is you actually go on a waiting list to get a room. So the rooms themselves were, like C-cans, modular C-cans that are converted into rooming, and there were some bathrooms, and they were small. Like I shared with 3 people in a very, very small area. But prior to that, I spent 2 weeks in the waiting tent. So it was a kind of a big mod tent. It was kind of gross in there at all times. People had hung blankets around on string just to give themselves any semblance of privacy. But that was only for 2 weeks, and yeah, again, to me, I just saw it as it's just all part of the ritual. You know, you do your 2 weeks there, you get yourself a room. When I first arrived, the bathrooms were very, austere. Is probably the best way to put it. They were there was no hot hot water boiler at the time, so it was cold showers for the first few days, just that kind of thing.
What was the mood of the place at that time in the war?
I think I guess the best way I could say it is I felt there was confidence. When I mentioned earlier that I felt that people were relatively relaxed. I sensed that was part of the fact that I wasn't there at the beginning. I was there, probably year five or six, and even in Kabul you could add on a few more years there. So you're 8 years in, so it was already organised. Things were already flowing, and I think it was far more relaxed, at least when I arrived. After roughly 4 months into my tour, somewhere around there, Kabul did experience, I guess, a lot more violence, and it did become a very violent area. So what you got is a lot of lockdowns. It was only a very small base I was on called Camp Eggers, and I think it became more tense as the tour got on. And it was really, again, it started off very relaxed, things were flowing, and then by mid-tour, just because of a few events that happened, things got very tense for a while there.
We'll come back to that in a second. Tell me a bit about, though, just the nature of your job. You go as a protocol officer, but you become an ADC. What were you required to do, and for whom?
Okay, I was effectively the personal assistant to the Deputy Commanding General of Police Training, like the entire police training in Afghanistan. And that was Major General Beer at the time, Stuart Beer. By the end of the tour, he was promoted to Lieutenant General. And so effectively I was his personal assistant. So my responsibilities consisted of, primarily, I had to ensure he got where he had to go. He had meetings, I would say 13 to 14 hours a day. He was always doing something, like very, very busy guy. Very impressive actually about how busy you can stay for that amount of time. But so what would happen is he would go from meeting to meeting, and between each meeting, there were always like packages or whatever he needed to know going into the next meeting. So my job was effectively get him to the meeting, make sure he's got what he needs to know when he gets there, and he can conduct his meeting. And then when he leaves, I have to be there ready and get him to the next one. And a lot of times that's not one base, like that's wherever it might be. He might have a meeting halfway across the country. I have to get him there, and I have to get him there on time, safely, and whatever. Obviously I wasn't in charge of safety, but I just had to make sure I booked everything.
And it's not like going through Manhattan or Edmonton in a business suit with a BlackBerry, right? How are you dressed? What are you using for vehicles? Just sort of describe that picture.
Okay, so we were using up-armoured SUVs. So they were Toyotas, so they really do look like, really a wealthy Afghani is what you look like. They were very, the Canadian generals specifically go for that low-profile look, and that way you blend in, a whole lot more. We always travelled with his close protection, so there was always, not only our vehicle, but another vehicle filled with well-trained guys ready to jump at a given moment. And as far as if you stayed within Kabul, because Kabul was considered relatively safe. So, and I say relatively, but it was relatively safe compared to, say, Helmand or Kandahar, some of the outer provinces. So what that meant was you could tone down, or you would tone down your offensive posture. And by that I mean, when we went to Kandahar, I had all weapons, C7, pistol, full fighting order, helmet, everything. Depending on where you were going in Kabul, you would change your profile accordingly. And because it's important to know, like, I don't know if that's, some people would see that as offensive. It's like, no, that's very dangerous. But when you're meeting with the Minister of Interior, you can't go in with a C7 and in full battle gear, So what you would do is you would bring it and make sure if necessary it was available and you could get it on quickly. but you didn't necessarily have your full fighting order on at all times.
So I'm assuming that you've never been a general's aide here in Canada. What was it like making that transition from your experience as a reservist to now you're organizing General Beer's day?
It was interesting. I had a pretty decent handover, so I had a two-week period with the previous aide, and it was really more about adaptability and, could I adapt? So right when I arrived, obviously because I'm coming in, the general's been assigned an aide rather than him selecting it. I spent some time, half an hour with him where he, I guess, quasi-interviewed me, and it was more about, I think he even said it actually, it's my maturity. I was probably in my late 30s by that stage, and I felt it was quite easy for me to adapt, and it was really just about, I think the Army's like this, it's just about figure out what you have to do, figure out what your job is very quickly, and then do it the best you can. And I learned very quickly that as long as I got General Beer to his meetings with the right stuff in in hand, that was all I needed to do. And I shouldn't say that's all. I mean, you can always step it up. And I tried to do that too. Again, we call it an aide de camp, and it sounds nice, but you're his personal assistant. You are part of him. And I took that to heart too, where to me it was whatever he needs that can make his life easier, I'll just do it. And if that means, grind his coffee and make sure he's got a coffee ready for him, do it then. Because then he doesn't have to walk out and ask for a coffee or have someone else make it or whatever. So I tried to do that a lot. And so I didn't, to answer your question, I didn't find it difficult. I think it was just a matter of figure out as fast as you can what you have to do to satisfy the job position and to satisfy him. And that was okay.
What was it like working for him?
It was fantastic, actually. It was really good. I won't say this is a negative, but I mentioned earlier, he is busy. Like, he is an amazingly busy guy. I don't think he sleeps. I would actually stay with him. When he arrived, I was always try to be there a few minutes earlier, which was, usually about 6 o'clock in the morning. When he went to his room, it was normally around 11 o'clock at night. So I'd stay as long as he was there, because again, I saw it as I'm his personal assistant. If he needed something, I got to be there. But I'd drop him off his room. He'd keep working. I know he was working because he's checking emails, because I'm the guy who has to check his emails in the morning. And so what does that mean? So that means that he was very, very busy, and it's probably the busiest job I've ever done. But as far as doing things, when you're busy, things are fun. It was interesting. I had nothing better. You're in Afghanistan. I've got nothing better to do. So I think I really enjoyed that.
What about, do you think you had, what kind of personal rapport did you have with General Beer?
It was very business. So what it meant was, I think we both understood when you are a major general and I was a lieutenant, there is a lot of ranks in between. And I think that was how we conducted ourselves, and in the sense that I didn't become too personal. I wasn't like his confidant or anything like that. I mean, I was just too new to the business, I guess. But as far as how we got along, I like to believe we got along very well, in the sense that I tried my best to do everything he needed, and I think he's a very amicable person, so he doesn't treat anybody badly. So he treated me very well. When I did do things that annoyed him, he let me know. And he was good. He was just stern and just told me. But we had a good working relationship.
How did you annoy him?
One thing that I learned quickly too, you just have to annoy him once, is that he doesn't like to stand around. So what that means is, when he arrives at a location, when that door opens, he should be walking to his location. So if there's not someone there and I have to find out where he's supposed to go, that'll upset him. And it works the same the other way. When he finishes a meeting, the car better be there. So part of my job is to get a sense of when things are summing up, And as they're summing up, I have the CP position the vehicle in the right time, and a lot of times there's a little bit of game in that, I guess, is you got to figure out, all right, he's getting ready, CP, get the vehicle up there so that when he literally walks out the door, it's there. And the one thing that drove him nuts, I shouldn't say drove him nuts, nothing drove him nuts, but that he really would get upset with me is if we were outside in an unsafe zone. So if we were outside and we arrived at a location, whether it be an embassy or a training centre or whatever, and he arrives at the door, and they should just open the door and he should drive straight in. If he has to stop then and sit out the front of this gate, then he would be upset. And that was part of my responsibility. I would have to do things like, okay, I get it. I got to call ahead and make sure there is an English-speaking person out the front waiting for him. Whoever's going to meet him, they better be waiting for him at the gate.
And do you think that was a function of his just being very conscious of the security situation and his own vulnerability, perhaps? Or?
Possibly. I don't want to speculate on why. I just think he's busy. He needs to get from A to B. And getting hassled at a gate probably isn't what he wants to be spending his life doing when he already works hard enough as it is.
You must have, because he's in charge of the police, or that's his focus, the police are around the country, you must have done a fair bit of traveling. What were your impressions of the places you went, of sort of the state of the war in 2011?
It was... I guess I should start by saying that I went everywhere, like literally every regional command, and which of course was, I guess, one of the highlights of my tour. And what it was absolutely evident, it was the areas that were, I guess you might consider, safer and better areas to be, particularly in the north. You still had to maintain security, obviously, but it was how people conducted themselves. And when I found when we were up north, we would, things were I guess less tense is probably the right word. And whereas when you were down south, there was a lot more danger involved. I went to Helmand once, and that was probably the one with the highest and tightest security. Needless to say, it's a dangerous area. Obviously, Kandahar was another one. Everything was ramped up, like security was ramped up, maximum. And you knew it. You knew it was ramped up maximum when you're in the south. But when you're in the north, it wasn't like that. And in Kabul, it just wasn't like the same. So that was, as far as how's the war going, yeah, that definitely is the biggest thing.
Did you, any time that you really felt for your personal safety, a particular situation?
Yeah, there were. I think probably the biggest, there was only one specific event where there was active danger, and they were opening up a new police training centre in a place called Wardak Province, which officially is in the Eastern District. And it had been under, I guess, they call it rocket attacks, right? Speculative rocket attacks, where they're just firing old rockets into the compound. And so they were opening up this new training centre, and they call it the third or maybe it's the deputy vice president or some version of a third in command of the country, and he was there to open it. And of course, General Beer was a national police training centre, so he was there, and there were several other high-ranked military officials, and everyone's gathered around this one building where they're going through the presentations, and I had chosen not to go inside. So one of the things with General Beer is, if I got him to the meeting, as long as I got him in there, that was the main thing. And they were because you had such high-ranking officials of the Afghani side, they weren't allowing weapons inside the buildings. And that was fine. General Beer had no problem with that, but his close protection was allowed in. He was allowed to bring one member, a bodyguard, and that was fine too. So he went in, and then they wanted me to strip down my weapons, and I wasn't going to put them. So I hung on to them. So I waited out the front, and then the building did come under attack. So, but what was key about this was that a rocket was fired, and it landed. It was no more than 30 meters from where I was, and I was standing with a group of people. So all of a sudden, this rocket just hits the ground just off to your left, and everyone goes into their, I guess, battle mode or whatever. Everyone hits the ground, finds a safe spot. There was some machine gun fire because the base was actually on the side of a hill. So you could see over the fence really easy. I didn't think it was very secure. And so you could fire from town so there was some machine gun fire. So, one thing about it was that, I think I did all of my immediate actions correct, which is the CP guy would always take care of the general. So it's not my responsibility. But I also have to note that he was only going to take care of the general. So I had to protect myself and get to cover. And then, of course, the general, being a general, gets protected and rushed off in an armoured vehicle, and they get him out of there, leaving me stuck. So I had to I knew where they call it the international compound was. So I had to make it to the international compound, but obviously, there was gunfire and there was a threat in place. So I really had to figure out, what's the best way to do this without exposing myself. So I think the biggest thing there was that I waited till things calmed down, and then I kind of went from building to building and just kind of hopped. And I had another guy with me. There was an American Air Force guy, and we kind of building hopped till we got back to the compound where the general was. And fortunately, we moved quickly, because the other side too is when they are under attack and the general's got to get out. If his helicopter comes in to take him out, it's not his job. It's my problem if I get left behind. So anyway, I made it back, and he was still there. And then we jumped on a helicopter and got out. So that was the only time where I actually had to take what I would refer to as real immediate actions. I know it's not that much, but when I was in Eggers, at Camp Eggers, there were a few other, again, threatening scenarios, but they were ones where I was at my own camp, I was at my own base, certain things happened, and my job is to go to the bunker. Okay, I go to the bunker and I hang out, and the QRF takes care of everything. So I never have to action anything in those circumstances. Just in that same breath, though, one thing, and I will give credit to the general on this, is that he didn't mind calling the base commanders out, like we're talking the Afghani base commanders, if they weren't doing their job. And that same base, that it was the National Training Centre in Wardak, it had come under attack a lot. It was constantly, it's only a small area, and it had come under attack a lot. So we had returned there about 3 weeks later, and we were in a scenario where General Beer, and these are my words, if you ever spoke to him, he might say I was different, but he was chewing out the commander, the Afghani commander, and it was good, it was great, and he needed it, right? I was very impressed. But it got tense, really tense. And it was one of those scenarios where you had the base commander and all his guys standing in a half circle, and then you had the general and his bodyguard, and then me and a few other guys standing in their half circle. And it never went to any kind of a standoff thing, but you just knew the tension was in the air, because the general's standing there with the hand, just saying this. Basically, he was saying it was appalling the way he's running his base, and the security's terrible, and whatever he was talking about. But I just remember thinking, this is not going to go well. If that Afghani general, we'd always heard stories about how the Afghanis are very proud, and if you embarrass them, that's when you might get trouble. And it might have been also in my mind too, but it was certainly very tense. So I'd say they were the top two. It was all related to the same thing, but they were probably the top two, I guess, true tense situations that I was actually involved in.
What about can you give me your sense of the state of the Afghan police at this time, based on the briefings that you would have attended, because they were constantly a source of concern, right, over the years, that the police were just not. They were corrupt or not well paid enough, or couldn't be relied on. what kind of state were the police in by 2011 in general?
I think it's probably best that I don't speak to that. It's just more because my role is there as a lieutenant, aide de camp to the general. I think any comment I make probably won't sound right and could be wrong.
Okay.
So,
sure.
yeah.
Are there any other memorable sort of moments that stick out for you in your 6 months there?
Yeah, actually, there's one that sticks out, which is a very big positive, and which I really like, and that is that we did this. There is a little bit of tourism, I guess, that goes on while you're there, and there's this mount in a location called Deruleman, and you might have heard of what's called the Russian Officers Club, which you had one of the bases where 3VP was located, and they were going to do a hike up this mountain, and we'd got wind of it and we wanted to go on that hike too, so we asked if we could come along. So we drove down to their base, and then from there we went up this mountain, and for all intents and purposes it was just a really hard hike, up a steep mountain to a very high point. It was never a threat, especially you're surrounded by 3VP, who would have probably loved to have someone attack them, and they would have been in serious trouble. But what was memorable is that there were these two local towns kids. There was a girl she must have been about 11, and her little brother who was about 8. And they kind of follow alongside. We're not the only ones who ever go up that mountain, so it's not like we're the first. So they kind of follow alongside, and they kind of hang out with you. And I'm pretty certain they know that they get gifts, and they get this, and they get that, So they kind of hang out and they follow us up. So the first thing that really stood out to me was that you've got these kids, 9, 11 years old, and they're just bouncing up this track. And here's the army guys, and we're sweating, and we think we're big tough army guys, and we're sweating. It was really hard work. It was hard work, and these kids are just running up, up and down, and then and back. And the reason I like that piece of the story is that you have just these kids, and despite the fact they're in this war-torn country, is that they're out, they're playing, and I like to believe that they like having us there. I like to believe that. I like to believe we gave them that ability to be actually out and about like that because we brought the security. And I don't believe that, maybe 10, 15 years ago, those same kids could have done, the same activities. So that's I guess, part one of that story. And anyway, so we get up the mountain, and, we're up there, and the little brother, is just kind of hanging out, just pretending he's friends with us. And some guys brought up like little stickers, like little Canada flag stickers or British flag stickers or whatever country the person's from. So they gave this kid some stickers, and you might as well give him $1 million, because this was like the greatest thing he'd ever got. Like, he loved it so much. And one of the thoughts I had on that is it's somewhat more of the beauty of that. Like the kids, here you are in Afghanistan, and kids are still being kids, and they love these little prizes that you gave them. And it also made me realize too that that's part of why you're there. And you're not there, we say we're there for the stability of the country and, certain reasons. But as far as I'm concerned, that's what you're there for. That's what I'm there for. If we can bring stability so that these kids can be kids, I think that's what it is. And just looking at these kids, the kid, you could have picked him up and put him in Canada. He would have been the same kid, he just would have been excited about stickers and silly little things. But it was I don't know. I think it was just more of a moment of beauty in the whole war of Afghanistan, and so that's why it was very, very memorable for me.
As you're talking, I'm just thinking, as the flip side as a parent, as a father of young children, did you ever find that affected you in a not so positive way? Just seeing how children are living in Afghanistan, the poverty, things like that. Well, there's one, and it's an obvious one, and that is that
our, I think, I'm going to be careful what words I use, but our kids have it very good. And I think sometimes they don't understand that. And we tend to be entitled. I was trying to avoid using that word, but I think here in Canada we're very entitled because we don't know any different. Now, I think and again, the beauty of that is, even my kid, I could give him anything up till about the age of 10, and he would love it. It's the best present he ever got, whatever it is, it's always the best. But once they start getting past there, they start forgetting or they start learning or getting used to their society and things like the Xbox. So they want to play video games all the time, and that's one thing that it's a negative that I took away from that scenario, is that I think that we because we don't understand how other people have it. I look at some kids today and I'm just like, you've got no idea how good you've got it. And I try to teach my kids that there's more to life than how it is here in Sherwood Park in Canada. So yeah, I guess that's the only negative though that comes from that.
Is there anything else about your experience in Afghanistan that you want to say, like in country?
Again, I think it does get down to, I do believe in just the concept of people have got to get out and see other parts of the world, and they've got to see different things. And what I did get to see was Afghanistan. So here in Canada, we talk about how it is in Afghanistan, and people use terms like the sandbox or whatever they want, derogatory terms they want to say. But what I got to see is how Afghanis are and what they really are. And you hear a lot of the negatives, but we don't ever get to see the good. Well, when you go there, you do get to see the good as well. And I think that was one thing a takeaway, is that I got to see that there's good people and we are helping the good people. And I think that's important, but I don't think a lot of people see that.
It just occurs to me, you worked for General Beer for 4 months, then you worked for an Italian general after that?
That's correct.
What were the differences in maybe there's their personal style?
Yeah, well, obviously there's a big one, is that the 14 to 15 hour days closed up very quickly. But I tell you one thing, in the defense of, I guess the European general, like obviously I make the joke because, lunchtime would come around and that's downtime, for the European culture. And it meant it was downtime for me as the aide. But what I did find was that the Italian general was far, far more self-sufficient. Like, he didn't need an aide. Like, he didn't need it. He just took care of himself. So what that meant was, and he even told me outright, if I've got a meeting that's just here in Camp Heggers, then Bryn, you don't need to be there to walk me there. I know how to get there, and I can pick up my own papers off the desk and take them there. Whereas, General Beer, it was like I would have all the papers ready. I'd have them as he's walking out the door. Here they are, sir. Yes, got them. I'm at the next door. That's that kind of thing. The Italian didn't have that. He was far more relaxed in the sense that I'll take care of myself. You just, if I got to book something, that's a distance away or outside the base, just make sure I get there. And I think that was one of he was very, very relaxed. But I had a really good time working for him. He was a really good guy. And actually, if I don't mind, I'll speak about him. He was actually in the Carabinieri, which is the militarized police there in Italy, from their parachute. I don't know if it's a battalion or a regiment, but he was from their paratroopers. So he had an obscene amount of experience against the mafia. So he was an impressive guy, really for such a relaxed guy. He was very, very impressive in his, in his abilities, at least in my opinion. And so he was a very strong policeman, I guess is what you'd say.
So ultimately, looking back on the job you did for both those gentlemen, how satisfying was that for you?
Actually, it was. I really did enjoy it, and to me, again, it's all about challenges. Like I do like I like kind of the adventure and the challenge of things, and I don't think like satisfaction to me comes from you put yourself in a really unfamiliar scenario and you just roll with it. And if you can come out, not just survive it, but actually come out having done a good job or having kind of looking back and saying, you know, I kind of enjoyed that, that's the satisfaction. And I think that's what it was. My understanding was, now this is obviously me speaking, but is I did do a good job for General Beer and for the subsequent general that I took over, and then the handover to the French. My understanding is I did a very good job, so I believe I actually did that. So there's the satisfaction of I've got no idea what job I just volunteered to when I went there, but to be able to come out looking back saying, yeah, I'm pretty certain I did a very good job. And that was good, and that was my satisfaction.
What was it like going from that very structured environment, focused, coming home?
Well, obviously the initial coming home is, I was desperate to get home by that stage. So it was more of a massive relief. So I know when we went to Cyprus for the decompression, I spent most of Cyprus just like, I just couldn't wait for Cyprus to end. It was supposed to be enjoyable. But when I got home, it was just, first thing off was, it was a massive relief. The second thing was that we had pre-planned, because I actually got home just before Christmas. So we'd pre-planned we were going to go to California with my family, my parents' family, so my extended family, my parents and my sister, and my wife's side too, all going to go to Disneyland in California. And it was great to see everybody, but it was very overwhelming because, you know, again, you're in this environment where I just wake up, I do my job, 16 hours or whatever, go to bed, and just do the routine over and over. And then suddenly I'm in this environment of, everyone's around there and they love you and they all want to know how was it and what happened. And it was very overwhelming for that initial period. And then I think more long term, and this is where I believe I do understand a lot of the, you hear about some of the problems that the veterans have or whatever, is you do look at the society in a different light. I truly believe that. You just look at it in a different light, and I think that's something I never actually got over, was that just that notion, again, I think it comes down to materialism and entitlement, is that, you just laugh at some people now. You're just like, you have no idea. You have no idea what some of these kids have got to deal with, or some of these people have to deal with. And that's been tough. Like it's kind of haunted me a little bit in the last 5 years since I've been married. Nothing bad. I don't mean that in a bad way. I just know that I look at people and scenarios, and I look at them and I just shake my head now. And I didn't do that beforehand. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway.
Any other lessons that you took away?
I don't have a lot of positive lessons that I should. I'd like to be able to say that, it changed my outlook on life, and and there was a lot of disappointment. I truly do have a lot of disappointment with when I look at our society and what our politicians fight about. It just disappoints me. Like, it truly disappoints me. Like, here we are, we fight over the most trivial things. And that is the one thing, again, that I can't let go of. I've never been able to let go of it since I left Afghanistan. It's the fact that we fight over stupid things, and we can't kind of keep our focus on what is important in this world. Really, that's it. That's... I don't have much more to say on, what did I see. I don't. I have these certain key things that I carry with me in terms of negative against, I shouldn't say against our society, but against, when I see things happen, I'm just like, whatever.
This last question might just be a bit of a variation on that, but or penultimate question, but if you had to sum up, how did the experience affect you as a person, as a soldier? One or both ways. I want to believe it made me a bigger person. It gave me a better understanding of the world. Like, you never,
even as a tourist, you don't get to see the same thing as a tourist. And even then, it's not like I was, completely delved right into the local populace or anything. But you get to know people, you get to learn about them and their experiences, whether it's the cleaner, we used to have this cleaner that'd come in every day, and you can't help getting to know the guy, right? You barely speak English, but you get to know him. You knew his wife was pregnant, you knew that he's got 3 kids, you just know these things. And I think because you see that in these other places, when you do see it on the news here, or people talk about Afghanistan or the Middle East or Muslims or anything like that, you have a different perspective. You got to see a different perspective. It's like seeing it in a different lens. So I think the positive there is that I have a lens now that I might not have had before. I think the position I took also allowed me to have that. As a fighting guy, you'll find, especially talking with the guys, spend a lot of time fighting. Go on patrol, wander around the desert and fight. You don't see nice things, but because the general obviously has to be in tight with ministers and whatever, we went to a lot of dinners with, you learn a lot about their culture, and even at the general level, he's trying to learn the language. He would have a language assistant who would teach him every day more and more words so he could use them. Well, I got to learn that too. I can't speak anything, but I got to see different things. So that's the biggest thing is, I got to see that. The big negative is the one I mentioned before, is that I do have a terrible tendency just to look down on people and say, you got no idea.
The one question that I'm just asking the various LERs, like Sergeant Ewell and the Colonel, is just because before you went, your regiment took several fatalities. You were just at the time a fairly junior officer, but what was that like at the time? What's your recollection of how those casualties affected this regiment?
I think it needs to be broken into two parts. There was the original 2006 tour where we did lose a guy, and I didn't know him, and it was at least 2 years. Time had passed 2 years by the time I came along. So it was really the later years, and the reason I break it into two is because there is what you have is what I might say is combat or work related. And then, of course, one of them was a training related in our unit. And work-related ones are always sad but it's the business. And at least, again, this is definitely just the opinion of myself. But when an infantry soldier goes to Afghanistan, they're fully aware of what they've put their hand up for. You are an infantry soldier. You might get put right on the very front line and you might die. Got it. So when on that side of it, it's sad, but it's one of those you can hold your head high. He did his job. He was killed in action. And the training side was different because that created more, in my opinion, a morale issue. And that morale issue is just on so many levels, because you had the death of a soldier, you had several wounded, again because of a training accident, and any officer knows, and we're taught at a very young age that, I should say early in our career, I wasn't young, very early in our career, that there's certain things as an officer you must do, and one of them is accountability. So troops will follow us wherever we ask them to go. Like, you want to send them into, the worst place on earth, they will go. But they have faith in the fact that you're competent. And when they lose that faith, the morale does go down. And having a training accident, I think falls into that. And you hear it when you talk to the troops. It's not so much about even what happened. It's about why it happened, the accountabilities of what had happened. One of my troops now, of course, I shouldn't say one of my troops, I should say one of them was physically involved in the setting up of the training accident. It wasn't his fault in no way, shape or form. But then, he's dragged into this, and the other guys were just part of the people standing around, and some of them got wounded. But again, it's about they're there doing anything we tell them to do, and we're not competent enough, or we don't care enough. Whatever the reason, one of them got killed because of one of us, and that created, and it still does to this day, creates a morale issue. And you hear it. I'm sure we've all heard it about, if we go on a range and a troop gets hurt, does the officer take the blame, or does he get off? And that negativity still floats around this unit without question. And I think it just resonates. It continues to resonate throughout our unit. It really, really does. Is that there must have been nearly a platoon of our guys, so maybe 20 or 30 of our guys on, in that area. Quite a few injured, one of them killed, and that's what resonates. I think a lot more than say, corporal number 2 who was killed in action. Killed in action, he was killed doing his job. That happens as part of the job. But an accident, no, and they won't forget it. Our unit won't forget it. And so that, I think, is the biggest thing, my takeaway anyway.
And to be honest, I was not aware of that until I started talking to Sergeant Ewell, just how this unit feels about that officer. But it's quite palpable. He said the same thing as you.
Yeah.
So is it poisoned relationships between the KOCR and the LERs? Or?
No, I don't see that at all. I don't see that at all. I think it's more poisoned relationship between troops and leadership. And I don't want you to get me wrong. Like I think that the Sergeant Ewells and whoever, they expect guys like me to do my best and not get them hurt. But I think they have this resonating idea that if I was incompetent and I got them hurt, that the guy dies, one of them, so it's a them versus us, one of them gets killed, I get away with it. And I think that's really what it gets down to, is at least from my understanding of the troops. And we get along. Like I like to believe I get along with the troops here very well, and they're I guess open to telling me what they're really angry about, if that makes sense.
But it's interesting. If I understand the way you're saying it, it's not the troops in this regiment saying this particular officer in the KOCR. It's like soldiers and officers in general.
That's the way I see it. I do not see them pointing fingers. It didn't matter that it was KOCR. I think it's more about one of them got killed, and it's our fault. Everyone knows the leaders are always at fault, right? The warrant, the officer, they're at fault. So if they're at fault, how come that kid's dead and they're not in trouble for it? They won't let that go, is the way I see it. And again, I do ranges, and I'm very by the book, but for that reason, I don't want to get questioned. I don't want someone coming back to me and saying what happened. And it's not about what happened; it's about it cannot happen. And I think that that's what's important on these ranges too. And they're very the senior NCOs are very particular on that, and they do their best to back me up too if I'm not doing something right, or if they think something's unsafe. They'll whisper in my ear and say, "No, I don't think you should do that." Yeah, good idea. Let's not do that. But no. To answer that question, I see it as leadership versus troop, not the unit-wise. In fact, I don't think anyone at all. The only thing I've heard, as far as I'm concerned, it's more of a defence than anything, is the fact that he wasn't infantry trained. That's his defence, and I think and the reason I only raise that is because the troops know that, right? But they know that somewhere, somehow, leadership messed up, and yet no leadership's hanging for it.
Last chance, is there anything that you haven't said that you want to say about your service overseas?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I enjoyed it. Got to see a lot of things, got to do a lot of things. I think as far as an infantry officer who doesn't deploy as an infantry officer, as a staff officer I deployed, I probably got one of the best goes you could get as a reservist. Again, I would have preferred to be employed as an infantry officer in some capacity, but notwithstanding that, it was a really enjoyable tour. I got to see a lot, I got to learn a lot, and it was good for me as a human. It was very fulfilling.
Think you'll go somewhere else someday?
Yeah, actually, I put my name in for this op reassurance. But I'm aware. My wife was very fine with the op reassurance one. I kind of a little bit of a safer environment. But I got no problem. I do want to. I had promised my wife years ago, and it was a promise I shouldn't have made. But I said that I just want to get one tour. I just want to do this, and then I'll be happy. And then once I did it, I'm like, I need at least one more. Just one more. So I would love to deploy again. In any capacity.
And she's okay with that?
No. She just puts up with it.
That's great. Thanks very much.
All right. Whew.